In the last few updates before the little break, I was a little vague about my word count progress toward 1 million words. I've reported my totals and put the data up on the screen, but I haven't spent much time dwelling on the details of those totals, and that's because I was running an experiment. Within the larger grand experiment, which is the Million Words Project, I made the decision to dramatically rearrange my priorities and shake up my routine. I decided to put fiction first. Why did I do such a thing, and what was the outcome of this experiment? I'll share the answer to those questions with you on this episode of The Million Words Project. Welcome back, everyone. This is The Million Words Project, and I am your host, Eric Sheridan Wyatt. 23 weeks ago, I challenged myself to write 1 million words over 12 months. In this video series, I share the progress I'm making in my million words quest, and I share some tips, tricks, and general insights about my writing and creative life along the way. I do all of this in the hopes that my million words journey will help someone out there as they pursue that creative, entrepreneurial, or philanthropic big thing project they've always wanted to tackle but haven't quite gotten around to. And I make these videos as a way to remind myself of the lessons I'm learning and the personal insights I'm experiencing throughout this process. The best way to really learn something is to share it with or teach it to others. So here we are in my basement studio, lights on, camera rolling. I know it's been a minute since I last posted a true video. For the small group of you out there who have been following along from the beginning, I do apologize. I posted an explanation video last week, but if you missed that, the short version of why these videos have been delayed is this. Life happens. These update videos are important to me, but sometimes the things that are more important take precedence. There were a number of big life events that all sort of popped up all at once, and a couple of those were a big surprise. So those things took precedence. But even more importantly, in the context of the video series, I had to make a decision. Do I take time away from meeting my writing goals to make new videos, or do I stick with my top creative priority first and then go back to making videos when I have more time? And the obvious answer is I chose to work on meeting my writing goals first. And that's the right decision for me. However, I am back. And if you are seeing this video, it means I have found enough time and energy at least to do another handful of these updates. And hopefully we'll be more consistent as we push on through 1 million words. Speaking of progress, let's get an update on my progress towards 1 million words. Week 23 of my quest for 1 million words was a big one. To stay on pace to reach 1 million words in a year, I set a target of 20,000 words per week. In week 23, I had a massive grand total of 32,727 words written. That's right. Across the board, it was a big, big week. The previous high word count week was week 13 with 25,500 words written. So week 23 was another 7,000 words above that biggest week. So that's pretty awesome. Before I get into exactly why that big jump happened, let's take one more minute to look at some of the data on display here. Looking at the charts and graphs, week 23 clearly shows a big spike in the 10-week rolling average, and the current word count after 23 weeks is just over 509,000 words. That's right, I passed the halfway point to 1 million words in week 23. I'm almost 50,000 words ahead of the minimum pace at that point. Great. And if you look to the left, you'll see the pie chart, which shows the distribution of the total words in each category. My life document project continues to be the biggest chunk of the pie, with journaling and nonfiction writing coming in second and third, followed by fiction writing at 16%. As mentioned before, the writing opportunities I've had with my freelance work have been sparse. So that only makes up about 4% of my total. This distribution or balance is part of what I want to talk about. So let's dive in. At the end of week 18, I was a little frustrated. I had at that point almost hit 390,000 new words, which was awesome. I was almost 30,000 words ahead of pace at that time, which was great. But one of the several reasons I started this Million Words Challenge was to increase my creative output, and a large part of my creative life is writing fiction, or at least it was prior to 2020. And at the end of the first 18 weeks, I'd only written about 32,000 words of fiction. Now, don't get me wrong. 32,000 words is far superior to 0 words. And on one level, I was really happy to have reawoken the fiction beast. But I wanted a little more. Fiction was only making up about 8% of my writing life through the first 18 weeks, and I wanted to improve on that. So, as I was journaling, I came up with the idea of Fiction First. I called it the Fiction First Initiative, an experiment within the larger experiment of the Million Words Project. The idea was simple. Set a goal to write 10,000 words of new fiction every week for 10 weeks. And achieve this goal by forcing myself to write fiction first before any of the other categories. So starting in week 19, that's exactly what I did. And boy, that experiment was a real mixed bag, let me tell you. If you've been watching these videos, you might remember that weeks 19 and 20 were rough on me. The video I produced for those 2 weeks was called The Almost Breakdown, because I had a little creative crisis of faith. So I started the Fiction First initiative all gung-ho and ready to go. That first week, the only thing that came before my first fiction writing session of the day was my bulletproof coffee, which I made and sipped on through the writing session. It wasn't long before I realized I'd made a big mistake. Yes, the first 2 weeks of Fiction First were successful. Week 19 was 10,100 words of fiction, and week 20 was 10,300 words of fiction. In 2 weeks, I'd written enough new fiction to equal 2/3 of my prior 18 weeks combined. But I quickly learned that not journaling first was a big mistake for me. So as week 2 of Fiction First turned into week 3, I changed my game plan. Journaling went back to the first place in my day, and then I simply planned each day with the following instruction in mind. How do I plan today to ensure I will have time to write fiction so I can meet my 10,000 word target this week? Even though fiction wasn't technically first, it was still a priority. I was still focused on making it happen. I just had to figure out a way to accomplish that while not blowing up the rest of my life. The third week of Fiction First saw me hit almost 11,000 words, so I was doing pretty well. The fourth week, though, there was a dip in fiction production, and partly that was due to trying to get some of these updated videos produced at the time. That set me up for the final Fiction First week, which was this week that I'm talking about now, and I had to really buckle down, push everything else off to the side, and get my words written. And I did. A really big week, capped off with over 13,000 new words of fiction written. It was a big win. So was the Fiction First experiment successful? Well, yes and no. I had 2 big wins with Fiction First. I wanted to rebalance the distribution of words, and if we look at the pie chart from week 18, which was fiction writing, in which fiction writing had only made up 8% of my total word count at that point, and week 23, where fiction now accounts for 16% of the total, that effort to rebalance was successful. On a more practical level, I also finished the rough draft of a new book of interrelated fiction stories, and having completed a book draft is a big win. However, not everything went as I had planned it. I actually intended to produce videos for the Fiction First initiative as a sort of mini-series supplement to this video series. However, after a number of technical setbacks and realizing I just didn't have time for more videos, I had to abandon that idea. And there was that mini breakdown I had, which was fun. But overall, I am glad I did it because it reminded me of some truths about priority setting and the constantly changing quality of this creative life. The quote this week comes from author and speaker Laura Vanderkam. She says, instead of saying, I don't have time, try saying, it's not a priority, and see how that feels. Here in week 23, I had a 32 50,000 word week, and I capped off a 5-week experiment where I focused on writing 50,000 words of fiction. I am as guilty as anyone of confusing the amount of time I perceive I have with the lack of consistent priority. Of course, we sometimes have priorities presented to us. We can't always prioritize things the way we want to. I was able to buckle down, rearrange my life, and really focus on producing words in week 23. That was a time when I could make that choice. However, in the weeks that have passed since that massive week 23, and when I'm actually getting a chance to film this update, a lot of other priorities have pushed themselves to the top of my list. My priorities have shifted, and it's been a struggle to even get the time to write, let alone have time for producing videos. And that is the takeaway this week. I'm not naive enough to think that anyone out there in video land can make a simple choice to rearrange their entire lives to work on the novel or screenplay or sculpture project they've been wanting to pursue. Or maybe you have some other big project that requires a certain level of creativity coupled with time on task and a dedication to seeing that big project through. I'm not proposing you drop everything else in your life and pursue that elusive big thing project. That may not just be impractical, it may be impossible for you. I get it, really. Instead, what I propose is that you take a step back and make an assessment. What are your priorities and how is that working for you? In order to do that, I'm going to suggest you answer a few questions for yourself. You can do this as a mental exercise, sure, or you can have a close friend, a creative confidant, that person you might explore these kind of ideas with over coffee or dinner. And as always, my real recommendation is to answer these questions by writing your responses in a journal or as a writing out loud exercise. But here we go. Question 1. Last week, what did I spend my time actually doing? Now, this may be as far as you get with this process because here's why. When I work with writers and other creatives to improve their creative output, this question is often difficult to answer. Most of us are busy all the time. Too busy, right? But often, when I ask people what they actually spent their time doing and how much of their time was taken up with the few tasks they actually recall from last week, the question is met with a big silence. There are 168 hours in a week. About 110 of those are waking hours on average. We know that we spend those hours and we know that we're busy, but sometimes we can't really quantify what we're doing and for how long. Now, if that's you, I will suggest you do a time audit this week and get an idea of what time you are actually spending on the various priorities, responsibilities, and other categories in your life. Once you have a more solid idea of how you spend your time, ask yourself this: am I satisfied with how I spend the limited resource of time that I am given every week? If the answer to that question is not a strong and unequivocal yes, absolutely, and let's be clear, there are very few of us who would be able to say an absolute yes to that question, then I would suggest moving on to question 3. What specific steps can I take next week to increase my satisfaction with how I spend my time? Notice, I didn't say, what can I do next week to be fully satisfied with how I spend my time? Rather, I'm suggesting you look for small, incremental steps you can actually make. Getting to a point of deeper satisfaction with how I am conducting my life and keeping my creative life a priority is the entire point of this Million Words project. Every week, I am making an assessment of how I did last week and trying to find ways to improve myself in the week to come. Some weeks, like in week 23, it's a big home run. And other weeks, not so much. But I can tell you, even as I was getting closer and closer to week 25, the halfway point of this year-long experiment, I am so much more satisfied with the balance in my life than I have been in years. Asking yourself these questions might help you head in that direction as well. That's it. Week 23 is in the books, and we are heading full steam to the halfway marker for the Million Words Project. I'm looking forward to sharing that with you in the coming weeks. And for the diehard fans out there, don't worry. Even if I have to bump the production of weekly or nearly weekly videos to a lower priority, I will periodically come back to these social medias, outlets, and video hosting channels to update my progress. Until then, if you find this content valuable, it would be swell if you could hit the like or thumbs up and share this with anyone who you think might be interested. Sharing, as they say, is caring. If you have a comment or question, leave a comment or check out the links in the show notes for ways to get a hold of me. I have a presence on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and I would be happy to hear from you. And there's lots of information about me on my website, wordsmatteresw.com, or the even more simple, ericssheridanwyatt.com. Thanks for joining me, and know that I appreciate your participation. Have a great week, and remember, your words matter, so make them count.